Blood was pooling around my head on the wet asphalt, and the last thing I expected to hear was someone calling my boss sir in that respectful tone I knew all too well. But let me back up, because what happened in that hospital waiting room changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain had been coming down hard all afternoon in Portland, Oregon. I was riding my motorcycle home from my job at Henderson Construction, where I worked as a site supervisor. At 24, I'd been managing crews for 2 years. I was proud of the respect I'd earned from the guys who'd been doing this since before I was born. I was taking the usual route down Morrison Street when it happened. A delivery truck ran a red light at the intersection of 42nd Avenue. I saw it coming, but there was nowhere to go. The impact sent me flying 15 feet. My bike skidded another 30 before crashing into a parked sedan. When I came to, paramedics were already loading me onto a stretcher. My left arm was definitely broken. I could taste blood in my mouth, and my vision kept going in and out of focus. One of the paramedics, a tall guy with graying hair, was asking me questions about my name and what day it was. "Can you tell me?" "Who to call?" he asked, shining a flashlight in my eyes. "My parents," I managed to say, giving him their contact information. "Rachel and Marcus Brennan." The ride to Providence Portland Medical Center was a blur of sirens and radio chatter. The paramedic kept checking my vitals and asking me to squeeze his hand. I remember thinking how professional he was, how calm his voice sounded, even though I could see concern in his eyes. At the emergency room, everything moved fast. Nurses wheeled me into a trauma bay where doctors started examining me more thoroughly. X-rays, CT scans, blood work. The broken arm was obvious, but they were worried about internal bleeding and a possible concussion. My parents arrived about an hour later. Mom rushed in first, her face pale and her hands shaking. Dad followed behind, looking uncomfortable in the hospital environment like he always did. "Oh, honey, what happened?" Mom asked, grabbing my good hand. I explained about the truck, about not seeing it until it was too late. They listened, asked the right questions, and seemed genuinely concerned. The doctor came in and explained that I needed surgery on my arm, and they wanted to keep me overnight for observation because of the head injury. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Dr. Patterson explained. "We'll need to put a plate and some screws in the radius bone. It's a common procedure, but he'll need several weeks of recovery time." That's when things got weird. Dad checked his watch and exchanged a look with Mom that I didn't understand at the time. "Well, if the surgery isn't until tomorrow," he said, "there's not much we can do here tonight, is there?" Dr. Patterson seemed surprised. "You're welcome to stay. You can bring in chairs, and visiting hours are flexible for family members of patients being admitted." "We actually had some important errands to run today," Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Since you're stable now, and the surgery isn't until morning, ... I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're leaving?" "Just for a few hours, sweetheart," Mom said quickly. "We need to pick up some things for your recovery period. Groceries, medications, that sort of thing." Dad nodded along. "The mall closes at 9, and we need to get to several stores. We'll be back first thing in the morning before your surgery." I stared at them, trying to process this. I'd just been in a serious accident. I was lying in a hospital bed with a broken arm and a concussion, and they were talking about shopping trips. "Can't that wait?" I asked. "Well, tomorrow you'll be recovering from surgery," Dad explained. "We don't know how long that will take. It's better to get everything done now while we know you're stable." The nurse who'd been quietly checking my during this conversation looked as confused as I felt. She glanced between my parents and me like she was waiting for someone to say this was a joke. "We'll see you bright and early," Mom said, kissing my forehead. "Try to get some rest." And just like that, they were gone. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd imagined the whole conversation. The nurse, a woman named Angela with kind eyes, came over and adjusted my pillows. "That was unusual," she said carefully. "Yeah," I agreed. "It was." She didn't push the topic, but I could see the sympathy in her expression. Over the next few hours, as evening turned to night, I had plenty of time to think about my relationship with my parents. We'd never been particularly close, but I'd always assumed that was just how some families were. Dad worked long hours at his accounting firm, and Mom was always busy with her various social committees and volunteer work. But this felt different. This felt like I wasn't a priority. Around 10 p.m., a nurse came in to give me pain medication and check my bandages. As she was leaving, I heard familiar voices in the hallway. The paramedic from earlier was talking to someone at the nurse's station. "The motorcycle accident patient in room 7 doing?" he asked. "Stable," I heard Angela reply. "Surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning." Though I have to say, his parents' reaction was strange. "What do you mean?" "They left right after getting the initial diagnosis. Said they had shopping to do." There was a pause. Shopping? After their kid's accident? That's what I thought too. The whole thing felt off. Couldn't hear the paramedic's response, but their voices were moving away down the hall. Yes. Something about his tone nagged at me, though. There was something familiar about it, beyond just having heard it during the ambulance ride. The night passed slowly. Hospital. Sounds, beeping machines. Nurses checking on me every hour. I dozed fitfully, my arm throbbing despite the pain medication. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I thought maybe my parents had changed their minds and come back. They never did. Morning came with the usual hospital bustle. A different nurse brought me breakfast and started preparing me for surgery. Dr. Patterson stopped by to go over the procedure one more time. "Are your parents on their way?" he asked. "They said they'd be here before surgery," I replied, though I was starting to have doubts. At 8:30, 30 minutes before my scheduled surgery time, they finally showed up. Mom was carrying several shopping bags, and Dad had what looked like a new leather jacket draped over his arm. "Sorry we're a little late," Mom said cheerfully. "Traffic was terrible this morning." I noticed she didn't mention anything about having just arrived from their shopping expedition. She set the bags down and came over to kiss my forehead again. "How are you feeling, honey?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I said, not entirely joking. Dad stood awkwardly by the door, checking his phone. "So the surgery should take how long?" "About 2 hours, Dr. Patterson said, appearing in the doorway. "We'll update you as soon as we're finished." They wheeled me down to the surgical suite, and as the anesthesia started taking effect, I found myself thinking about that paramedic from yesterday, something about his voice, about the way he'd spoken to the nurses. It was bothering me. But I couldn't put my finger on why. The last thing I remembered before going under was wondering if my parents would actually be there when I woke up, or if they'd find another errand that was more important than their son's. Recovery? The surgery went well, according to Dr. Patterson. When I woke up in recovery, my left arm was in a cast from my wrist to just below my shoulder, and the throbbing pain had been replaced by a dull ache. A nurse named Kevin was monitoring my vitals and asking me the usual post-surgery questions. "Your parents are in the waiting room," he said. "Should I let them know you're awake?" I nodded, though part of me wondered if they'd actually stayed the entire time or had found another excuse to leave. When they walked into the recovery room 20 minutes later, Mom was carrying a coffee cup from the hospital cafeteria, and Dad was scrolling through his phone. "There's our brave boy," Mom said, but something about her tone felt forced, like she was performing the role of concerned mother rather than actually being one. Dr. Patterson joined us to explain the recovery process. The surgery went perfectly. We installed a titanium plate with 6 screws. You'll need to keep the cast on for 8 weeks, then physical therapy for another month or 2. 8 weeks? Dad looked annoyed, as if this was somehow inconvenient for him personally. "It's a significant fracture," Dr. Patterson explained. "The radius bone was completely displaced. We're fortunate there wasn't nerve damage." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What about work?" I asked. "Construction wasn't exactly something you could do one-handed." "You'll be on medical leave for at least 3 months, the doctor said. Your employer should have workman's compensation that covers accidents like this, even if it happened off the job site." Dad's expression darkened. "Income?" I stared at him. "Dad, I almost died yesterday." I know, he said quickly. "It's just ... Financially, this is going to be challenging." Mom jumped in. "What your father means is that we're worried about you, honey. The financial aspect is secondary, but the damage was done. I could see exactly where their priorities lay. They discharged me that afternoon with a prescription for pain medication and strict instructions about keeping the cast dry. The ride home was quiet, with Dad focusing intently on driving and Mom making small talk about the weather. Our house in the Laurelhurst neighborhood had always felt warm and welcoming. But as we pulled into the driveway, it looked different somehow. Maybe it was the medication, or maybe nearly dying gives you a new perspective on things. But I noticed details I'd never paid attention to before. The perfectly manicured lawn, the expensive outdoor furniture on the covered porch, Dad's BMW sitting next to Mom's Lexus SUV. These weren't people struggling financially. Yet Dad had just complained about me being out of work for 3 months. "Why don't you get some rest?" Mom suggested as we walked inside. "I'll bring you some soup later." I went up to my childhood bedroom, which had remained largely unchanged since I'd moved back in 6 months ago to save money for a house down payment. The walls were still covered with my high school football trophies and graduation photos. Lying on the twin bed with my arm elevated on pillows, I felt like a kid again, but not in a good way. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. My parents would check on me dutifully, bring me meals, ask about my pain levels, but there was something mechanical about it all, like they were going through the motions of caring without actually feeling it. On Thursday morning, I was sitting in the living room watching TV when the doorbell rang. Mom answered it, and I heard her talking to someone on the front porch. "Is Trevor Brennan here?" Man's voice asked. "Yes, but he's recovering from surgery." "Can I ask who's calling?" "I'm Captain Rodriguez from Station 21. I was one of the paramedics who responded to his accident." My heart rate picked up. This was the guy whose voice had been nagging at me since. "The hospital." "Oh," Mom said, sounding surprised. "Is there some kind of problem? Paperwork we need to fill out?" "Nothing like that, ma'am. I just wanted to check on him, see how he's doing. We don't usually get to follow up on calls like this." Mom hesitated for a moment, then called back to me. "Trevor, there's a paramedic here to see you." I called out for him to come in, curious. About this unexpected visit, Captain Rodriguez walked into the living room, and seeing him in civilian clothes instead of his uniform, I immediately recognized him. He was taller than I'd remembered, with graying hair and kind eyes, probably in his early 50s. "How are you feeling, son?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me. "Better every day," I said. "Thanks for everything you did at the scene. I know I wasn't exactly coherent." He waved off my thanks, just doing the job. Though I have to say, "You're tougher than most." That was a serious impact. We talked for a few minutes about the accident, about my recovery timeline, about getting back to work eventually. Mom hovered nearby, occasionally joining the conversation, but seeming oddly nervous about something. "I hope you don't mind me asking," Captain Rodriguez said, "but what kind of work do you do?" "Construction. I'm a site supervisor for Henderson Construction." His eyebrows went up slightly. "Henderson Construction? It's a big company. Good benefits, I imagine." "Yeah, they take care of their people." My boss, Mr. Henderson, already called to check on me, said my job would be waiting when I'm cleared to return. It's great to hear. "What's your boss's first name?" "I might know him through the local business association." "James," I said. "James. Henderson, really good guy. Treats his employees like family." Something shifted in Captain Rodriguez's expression. He glanced at Mom, then back at me, and I could see him processing information in his head. "James Henderson," he repeated slowly. "Tall guy, probably around 60, drives a white pickup truck." "That's him? You know him?" Captain Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with an expression I couldn't read. "Yeah," he said finally. "I know James Henderson." Way he said it made the room feel suddenly tense. Mom had gone very still beside the couch. "Actually," Captain Rodriguez continued, "James Henderson is my boss." I blinked. Confused? "Your boss? But you're a paramedic." "I am, but I also own a small landscaping company on the side. Henderson Construction contracts us for a lot of their commercial projects, ground preparation, final landscaping, that sort of thing." "Oh, that's cool," I said. though I wasn't sure why this information felt significant. He said, his eyes never leaving my face. Your boss, James Henderson, is a good man. He really cares about his employees. Which is why what happened at the hospital has been bothering me. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Captain Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. Son, when I heard your last name was Brennan, and then I saw your parents at the hospital, ... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. What about my parents? I've been working with James Henderson for 5 years. I've been to company barbecues, Christmas parties, employee appreciation events. I know all his supervisors, especially the younger ones he's particularly proud of. The room felt like all the air had been sucked out of it. Mom had gone pale. I know Trevor Brennan, Captain Rodriguez said quietly. James talks about you all the time. It's how you're like the son he never had. How proud he is of your work ethic. Your leadership skills. I was starting to understand where this was going, but my brain was refusing to process it. The thing is, Captain Rodriguez continued, James has also mentioned that Trevor Brennan doesn't have any family. That his parents died in a car accident when he was 16, and he's been on his own ever since. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Mom, who was staring at the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. That's impossible, I said weakly. These are my parents. I've lived here my whole life. Captain Rodriguez's expression was gentle but firm. Son, I don't know what's going on here, but Marcus and Rachel Brennan died in a car accident 8 years ago. James Henderson paid for their funeral. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus and Rachel Brennan died 8 years ago. James Henderson paid for their funeral. I looked at the woman I'd called Mom for as long as I could remember, searching her face for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding, but her expression told me everything I needed to know. Guilt, the fear, the resignation, it was all there. Who are you? I whispered. The woman I'd known as Rachel Brennan finally looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Trevor, please let me explain. Explain what? My voice was getting louder, hysteria creeping in. Explain how you've been lying to me. For 8 years? Explain how my real parents are dead and I never knew? Captain Rodriguez stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the situation he'd unknowingly exposed. Maybe I should go. Seems like a family matter. No, I said firmly. Hey, please. Stay. I think you might be the only person in this room telling the truth. The man I'd called Dad, Marcus, finally spoke. Captain Rodriguez, I appreciate you checking on Trevor, but this is a very complicated situation. I'll bet it is, Rodriguez replied, his paramedic training clearly kicking in as he assessed the emotional trauma unfolding in front of him. Please, the woman said, turning to me with desperation in her eyes. Let me tell you what really happened. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to run out of the house, but my broken arm and the medication made everything feel surreal. I was watching this happen to someone else. Start talking, I said. She took a shaky breath. My name is Susan Walsh. This is my husband, David. We knew your real parents. Knew them how? We were neighbors, David said. Your family lived next door to us in Beaverton. Oh. You were 16. When the accident happened, Susan nodded, wiping her eyes. You were so traumatized afterward. You had no other family, no one to take care of you. The state was going to put you in foster care, so you decided to kidnap me. It wasn't like that, David said quickly. You were in shock. You couldn't remember anything about the accident, couldn't even remember your own name for weeks. The doctors said it was psychological trauma. Susan leaned forward. We had lost our own son 2 years earlier. Cancer. He was 18. Just a little older than you were then? My head was spinning. None of this made sense. But I remember growing up here. I remember being a kid in this house. No, you don't, Susan said gently. You think you do, but those are our son's memories. Michael's memories. We showed you his photo albums, told you his stories, helped you create a new identity because your real memories were too painful. Captain Rodriguez was watching this unfold with a mixture of professional concern and personal horror. Ma'am, what you're describing sounds like identity theft, David finished. Fraud, kidnapping, we know what it sounds like. But you have to understand, Susan pleaded. He was so broken, couldn't function. The doctor said he might never recover his memory, and even if he did, the trauma could have lasting psychological effects. I tried to process this information, but it felt like trying to hold water in my hands. So you just took me? The funeral was small, David explained. Your parents didn't have many friends, no extended family. After the service, we brought you home with us. We told people you were our nephew from out of state, that you'd come to live with us after a family tragedy. What about social services, school records? How did you? Michael had just graduated high school, Susan said. We used his birth certificate, his social security number. We were close enough in age and appearance that no one questioned it. Our son had been homeschooled his last 2 years because of the cancer treatments, David added. We said you needed time to adjust to your new living situation before enrolling anywhere. By the time you started community college, you believed you were Michael Brennan. Michael, I stared at them. My name isn't even Trevor, Susan's voice broke. Your real name is Alex Martinez. Your parents were Maria and Carlos Martinez. They owned a small restaurant in Beaverton. Alex Martinez. Even hearing it, I felt nothing. No recognition, no flash of memory. It was like hearing the name of a stranger. Show him, Captain, Rodriguez said quietly. What? David looked confused. If what you're saying is true, you must have kept something from his real life. Documents, photos, something. Show him. Susan and David exchanged a look. We did keep some things. In case he ever remembered, or in case someone came looking for him. No one came looking? I asked. Your parents were immigrants, David? Said they didn't have much contact with family back in Mexico. The few friends they had here assumed you'd been placed with relatives somewhere. Susan left the room and returned a few minutes later with a small cardboard box. She set it on the coffee table between us, like it contained explosives. We were going to tell you eventually, she said. When you were older, more stable, but then years passed, and you seemed so happy, so normal. We convinced ourselves we'd done the right thing. I stared at the box. Inside were the remnants of a life I couldn't remember. A life that had been stolen from me. That's why you left me at the hospital, I said, understanding the flood. You were afraid someone would recognize me. When Captain Rodriguez showed up, we panicked, David admitted. Thought if we stayed away, avoided too much contact with medical staff or emergency responders, we could keep the secret safe. You let me think you didn't care about me because you were protecting your lie? Susan was crying openly now. We do care about you. We love you like our own son. That's why we did this in the first place. Captain Rodriguez cleared his throat. This is ... This is a crime. Multiple crimes. I have to report this, I know, David said resignedly. We've known this day would come eventually. I looked at the box again, then at the people who had raised me under false pretenses for 8 years. They had stolen my identity, my real family's memory, my entire sense of self. But they had also given me a home when I had nowhere else to. Go open it, I said to Susan. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside were photos of people I didn't recognize, but who shared my features. A young woman with my eyes and a man with my nose, standing in front of a restaurant called Casa Martinez.
Oh.
There were documents with my real name, school records, and a birth certificate. And at the bottom, a letter addressed to Alex in a woman's handwriting. Your mother wrote that for your 16th birthday, Susan whispered. She was planning to give it to you the day they died. I picked up the letter. With my good hand, staring at my real name written in my real mother's handwriting, Maria Martinez. A woman I couldn't remember, but who had loved me enough to write me a birthday letter I'd never received. Captain Rodriguez was on his phone, speaking quietly to someone. Probably his supervisor, or maybe the police. The fantasy life I'd been living was about to come crashing down in a very public way, but for the first time since waking up in that hospital, I felt like I knew who I was. Not Trevor Brennan, the construction supervisor whose fake parents cared more about shopping than his recovery. Alex Martinez, son of Maria and Carlos, whose real parents had loved him enough to build a life for him that someone else decided to erase. I want to read this letter, I said, holding it up. And then I want you to tell me everything you remember about my real parents. Everything. Susan nodded, still crying. Okay, we can do that. So I carefully opened the envelope. Realized that while my entire life had been built on a lie, the truth was finally setting me free. My real parents might be gone, but their memory didn't have to be, and maybe for the first time in 8 years I could start figuring out who Alex Martinez was supposed to become. The letter was written on pale blue stationery with small flowers. Around the border, my mother's handwriting was neat and careful, the kind you see from someone who learned English as a second language and took pride in getting every letter perfect. My dearest Alex, it began. Today you turned 16, and I am so proud of the young man you have become. Your father and I came to this country with nothing but dreams, and you are the best of those dreams made real. I had to stop reading. The words were blurring, and not just from the tears. She was so excited about your birthday, Susan said softly. She'd been planning a surprise party for weeks. Your father was going to close the restaurant early, so all the regular customers could come celebrate. Tell me about the restaurant, I said. David spoke up. Casa Martinez was on Powell Boulevard. Your parents worked 7 days a week to keep it running. Your mother did all the cooking, traditional Mexican recipes from her grandmother. Your father handled the front of the house and knew every customer by name. You worked there on weekends, Susan added. You complained about it sometimes, said you wanted to hang out with friends instead. But your parents were teaching you the business. They hoped you'd take it over someday. Captain Rodriguez had finished his phone call and was listening quietly. The authorities are sending someone over, he said. This is going to get complicated quickly. I looked up from the letter. What happens now? There'll be an investigation, he explained. Missing person reports, fraud charges, identity theft. The district attorney will have to decide how to handle the unique circumstances. Will they arrest them? I gestured toward Susan and David. What they did, regardless of their intentions, is serious criminal activity. Susan made a choking sound. We know we deserve whatever punishment comes. But Trevor, Alex, please know that every day with you has been a gift. Losing Michael nearly destroyed us, and you gave us a reason to keep living. You gave me a reason to keep living too, I admitted, surprising myself. But you also stole 8 years of my real life. I continued reading the letter. My mother wrote about family. Traditions I'd never experienced, relatives in Guadalajara I'd never met, and dreams she had for my future. She mentioned my love of soccer, something I'd completely forgotten about, and how proud she was of my grades in Spanish class. I played soccer? I asked. You were obsessed, David said. Played for your school team, practiced in our backyard. For hours, you had trophies, team photos, everything. What happened to them? We put them away. We were trying to help you forget the painful memories, but we ended up erasing the good ones too. Another photo in the box showed me in a soccer uniform, arm around a Hispanic man who was clearly my father. Carlos Martinez had my build and my stubborn chin. In the photo, he was beaming with pride, holding a trophy. I must have one. Your father never missed a game, Susan said. Even when the restaurant was busy, he'd close up and drive across town to watch you play. I found more photos, family gatherings with people who looked like me, celebrations where I was clearly the center of attention, moments of a life I'd lived but couldn't access. In one picture, I was helping my mother in the restaurant kitchen, both of us covered in flour and laughing. The accident, I said. Tell me exactly what happened. David took a deep breath. They were driving to the store to pick up decorations for your party. Drunk driver ran a red light on Burnside. The impact killed them instantly. Where was I? At home, getting ready for the party. We heard the sirens, saw the police cars. When they knocked on our door, hours later to tell you what happened. Susan shuddered. The sound you made, Alex. It wasn't human. It was pure anguish. You shut down completely, David continued. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, wouldn't acknowledge anyone trying to help you. The trauma counselor said they'd never seen anything like it. The state was going to put you in emergency foster care, Susan said. But you were so fragile, we were afraid you'd hurt yourself. So we offered to take you in temporarily. temporarily became permanent. You started calling us mom and dad about 3 months after the accident. At first, we corrected you, but the doctors said not to. They said you were creating a new reality to cope with the trauma. Captain Rodriguez was taking notes now, probably for his report. When did you decide to formalize the false identity? About a year later, David admitted. Alex Trevor was improving, but he still had no memory of his previous life. We'd been telling people he was our nephew, and it just became easier to make it official. Easier and illegal, Captain Rodriguez pointed out. We know that now. We knew it then, too, if we're being honest. I found one more item in the box that made my breath catch. Small wooden cross on a chain, worn smooth from handling. Your mother's, Susan said, noticing what I was holding. She wore it every day. It was her mother's before that, and her grandmother's before that. She wanted you to have it when you turned 16. I fastened the chain around my neck with my good hand. The cross felt warm against my chest, like it belonged there. There's something else, David said hesitantly. The restaurant. Your parents own the building, not just the business. When they died, everything went into probate. Since no relatives came forward and you were missing, it's still there? Empty for 8 years. The city's been paying property taxes out of the estate, waiting for an heir to claim it. The enormity of what had been stolen from me was becoming clear. Not just my identity and my memories, but my inheritance, my family's legacy, my connection to my culture. Sirens were approaching outside. Through the window, I could see police cars pulling into the driveway. Alex, Susan said urgently, whatever happens next, please remember that we love you. That will never change. I looked at this woman who had raised me on a foundation of lies, but had also given me 8 years of safety and stability. The situation was impossible to categorize as simply good or evil. I know you love me, I said. But love isn't enough to justify what you did. The police were at the front door now, their heavy knocks echoing through the house. Captain Rodriguez went to let them in, and I heard him explaining the situation in the hallway. As I sat there holding my mother's cross and my father's memory, I realized that my recovery from this accident was going to involve much more than just healing a broken arm. I had an entire identity to reclaim, a family legacy to explore, and a truth to reconcile with 8 years of carefully constructed lies. But for the first time since waking up in that hospital, I felt like I knew who I was fighting to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.